Hey, g'day, it's Presso. Thanks for stopping by. Now I've got an interesting little machining project to show you today, and it's one of those jobs that I thought I could knock over in a couple of days, and it turned out to be a sort of a rabbit hole, and it was way more complicated than I thought it would be, but it's interesting nonetheless, so I'll check that out shortly. It's over on the bench. But I've got a new sticker, it's up there, and it came from a gentleman named John Martin. And I was looking at the sticker, and I'm always impressed with the visual elements that's on these stickers sometimes. And this one sort of had me a bit stumped. The text on the sticker says Ling Hunt, and there is a sort of a stylized fish image there. And in the back of my mind I thought, I think a ling is a fish, and I googled it, and sure enough that's what it is. So I'm guessing that John's a bit of a fisherman. Certainly not my game. As far as I'm concerned, fishing is just drowning bait. However, thanks John, and let's go and check out this little project on the bench. So today's project is all about die holders. Now, if you're like me, you've probably got a drawer full of a selection of different die holders. They're probably all different, which is the case here. And a lot of these have just been collected over the years. So I think this one here came from either my father or father-in-law, I can't remember which. And it's solid forged steel, so it's actually very, very sturdy, but it's not particularly attractive to look at. These two here are really well made. Again, I think these are forged steel, and although they look identical, this one was given to me probably only about 15 years ago, but this one here came in a set with this tap holder, and I bought that when I was about 18 or 19 years old, and it was in a set of BA size taps and dies. So this little tap holder is beautifully made. It's really sturdy, very precise, and I absolutely love it. It's just the correct size for most of the taps that I use. And this die holder also is very well made. The trouble is with all of these that they have different combinations of screws for setting the die. So this one here has slotted head screws. This one here also had slotted head screws, but I've replaced them with socket head caps or socket head grub screws. And this one here's got some pretty bird over sort of slotted head screws, and this big one here. And it was just annoying. You'd go to get them out of the drawer and you'd have to check to see what sort of screwdriver you needed, or whether you needed a hex key. And what I was really looking for was to have a set that were all identical. So I was watching a video by Stefan Gotchwinder one day, and he opened a drawer and showed off all these die holders, and he had about like 10 of them, all identical, and he had dies in every one of them so that he didn't have to swap out the dies. And I thought, gee, that'd be nice to have a drawer with, say, I don't know, like 6, and put the common size dies that I use most often, all metric, and you wouldn't have to worry about changing them. So this is where I'm at with the project at this stage. Now, all 3 of these die holders have been made here in the home workshop, and where this got started was that I went to use a small 13/16 die on a BA size thread that I'd already made on the lathe, and I just needed to clean it up and extend it a bit. And I thought, you know what, this tool here is perfect. Now this belonged to my father-in-law, and he was an RAF aircraft mechanic. And after he passed away, some of the tools came to me, and this one had been sitting in a box for 40 years, and I'd never used it. And I thought, you know what, this is the perfect size for doing the job, because it's small and you can spin it really quickly and so on. So I went and got the die and put it in there, and well, it's fair to say it's a pretty rattly old fit. Now I don't know why, it's way oversized. Perhaps it was made for a special die or a homemade die, I'm not quite sure. But just as it is, I thought that's not good. It's not going to work. So I thought, you know what, it's time to bite the bullet and make my own. So all 3 of these die holders here have been made of steel. The 2 that are Parkerized, these black ones, they were the first attempt, and this was the second attempt here. Now these 2 here were made using a template on the metal lathe, and at first it seemed like the perfect way to do it, but it turned out to be a little bit more complicated than I thought to set it up. And this second method here, this second tool, has been made using a ball turning attachment in the lathe. Now again, you'd say, well, that's pretty straightforward if you want to get that sort of radius on the edge there, but it's not quite as simple as you might think. So this one here has taken me about 2 days to get the process dialed in, and that's what I want to show you, how to make them using the ball turning attachment. But you might also be interested in seeing how this profile turning method was done. So let's go over the lathe and I'll show you how I did this one, and then we'll make one of these. Okay, I'm going to try and do a sort of a dramatic recreation here, because this was the setup that I used to make this one here, but since then I've broken it all down and I've used a different method. But what I'd come up with originally was just simply to get some blanks. These are hot rolled steel. They were just sawn off a bar, and I cleaned up the ends on the milling machine and brought them to the correct length. Then I bored out the center to take the die. So where the die is fitted now, that was bored out on the lathe, holding the stock on a 4-jaw chuck, and the bore in the center is stepped. So the back side is smaller than the front side that holds the die. Now once I had that done, I set it up again in the lathe and I machined down the cylindrical section on both ends of the die holder. And what you were left with was a spigot on both ends, centered of course, and then a big square block in the middle which had to be profiled into that outline that you can see there. So far so good. And then I had watched a video by Max Grant at the Swan Valley Machine Shop, and he had used a profile turning attachment to machine a replica of a brass knob. So he had put the brass knob in the tailstock chuck, then he had a stylus, something like what you can see here, and the stylus just simply followed around the original part and it translated the shape to the tool tip, and that's what actually machined out the replica of the knob. Now the way he had done it, he was able to hold the part in the tailstock chuck, but I was a bit reluctant to try that because I knew that with an interrupted cut, if you didn't have tailstock support, there was every chance that that stock there would start to rattle around and vibrate, and you get a terrible finish on the part. So I sort of knew that I would need to have tailstock support to do that. So then the question arises, how do you hold the template? Now these templates were made of 6mm thick hot rolled steel. These were done on my small CNC milling machine, and that's the template for the smaller of the two die holders. And you really need to keep the template anchored down. It's fixed, and then as you move the stylus around the outline of the template, it translates the shape to the tool tip. So eventually what I came up with was to be able to clamp the template to the tailstock quill. Now this part that you can see here clamped around the quill is 3D printed plastic, and this was just an experiment, and I thought if this works I'll either cast this in aluminium or fabricate it from steel. Now it sort of did work, and I was able to get one of the die holders made using that technique. And basically all you need to do is to set the tool tip at the very center of your workpiece, and then adjust the position of the stylus until it's touching the center of the template. And everything here is adjustable, so this L-shaped bracket can move in and out, the stylus can move left and right, and you can move the stylus in and out of the bracket as well. So once you've got everything set up and you've clamped this collar in place, it should be a simple matter then, of course, to just simply manipulate the hand wheel on the saddle and the cross slide to make that tool tip track around what is essentially the outline of that template there. Now in practice it's not quite as easy as that. You've got to sort of do a series of roughing cuts like stair steps, and then gradually refine the shape until you're sort of tracking around this template. And of course you can only do half at a time, so I could go a little bit past center, but then I had to turn the part in the collet and do the other half. Now with this one here, it sort of looks okay, but this outline here is not concentric with the bore, and it's slightly egg-shaped, slightly elliptical, so it's slightly wider along the center axis of the part than it is across. And you might say, well, it doesn't really matter, but then I thought, you know what, this is basically just a ball turning exercise, and I thought if you had a ball turner you would be able to machine the whole profile in one operation. And that's why I abandoned this, and I thought I'll just use the easier method which is to use a ball turner. Now it turns out it's not quite as simple as that, but what I'll do is I'll make another one of these, and we might make one of the small ones if we have time, but essentially it's the same process. and then I'll show you what's involved in using the ball turner. But you could make up your own mind. If you think you can make this work, by all means use it. It might work better for you depending on the profile that you want. What I found was that there's probably something wrong with the geometry of my stylus and the tool tip. Maybe I should have had the stylus sort of vertical, or use a ball bearing or something, but then you have to account for the diameter of the stylus. So with this method here, I figured that the actual diameter of the stylus doesn't matter as long as it's sort of tracking around the template. So that's how I went with it for the first one, but let's have a look at the ball turning method. So this is the stock that I've started with to make these 1-inch die holder bodies. Now unfortunately the only material I had that would do the job is 20 millimeters thick, and what you need is a piece that's only 12.4 millimeters thick. So if I had, say, 1/2-inch stock, it would have been perfect, but sadly don't have any. So that's what it's going to end up looking like before it goes onto the lathe. So to get it from this to this, I had to slice off, say, 1/4 inch or about 6 millimeters off the thickness. I did that in my big metal cutting bandsaw, and although the cut didn't turn out perfectly straight, it gave me a piece big enough to put in the milling machine. And then I milled the two edges to bring it to parallel. The exact width here doesn't really matter. And then I machined both of the wide faces to get it down to 12.4 millimeters thick. So I'll get these blued up now. We'll mark some center lines and center punch it, and then we can go to the 4-jaw chuck and start boring it out. Okay, it's just a bit of idiot proofing. So this is going to be the center of the bore for the die holder, and this is the outer diameter. I've described a circle on there. So I'll go and set this up in the 4-jaw now and start boring out for the die. I've already done 2 of these just to get the settings on the DRO right, and I can go ahead now and get the other piece of stock set up. I'm doing 5 of these altogether, and this is the way I'm doing it. I've just got the jaws loose at the moment, and the stock is pressed up against the face of the chuck using the cardstock center. And with a little bit of pressure on that, you can now adjust the jaws in one at a time, take up the slack, and then you can tighten it down, but you don't need to tighten it a lot, because really this is probably inappropriate use of the 4-jaw chuck. The jaws aren't designed to hold stock this way, but like I say, we're not needing to hold this really tight. So I can feel that each of the jaws now is touching the side of the work. It's all rotating nicely on center. So I'll get rid of the tailstock and I'll just nip it up a little bit tighter, then we go ahead and drill and bore and counterbore. I just ground up this special chamfering tool here. This allows me to get right inside the bore. It's only got a tiny little chamfer on the end of it, and I made a note on the DRO to position the cutting edge where I wanted it to be, and then just take a very light cut right at the bottom of the counter bore there. I'll just show you with this M6 die how that fits. Now if that looks a bit loose, that's intentional, and the idea here with the split die is that you can drive the set screw into the split and expand the die, so it will cut a slightly oversized thread. But the bore of the die holder needs to be oversized for that to happen. So that's fine. What we'll do now is I'll process the others, and then we'll get on to turning the arms or ears or spigots, whatever you like to call them, on both ends of this stock. The next step in this process is to turn down one end of each piece of bar stock to 11.5 millimeters diameter for 12.5 millimeters long, and also to center drill. Now later on this will be drilled and tapped for M7. Now just to speed things up a bit, I've cut out the corner pieces with an angle grinder, but I've only done that on one end because I want to be able to grip these long edges in the forge or chuck. So I've got one set up here now. I'll get this dialed in. Now I had already center punch marked the very end of the stock, and that's where I've got this center set up here now. So I'll get this one done, and then later we'll do the same thing at the other end. We'll cut out those corner pieces, and this can be gripped in a collet. It's probably also a good idea to cut these corners off at 45 degrees just to make the ball turning process go a bit quicker. Okay, I've got most of these processed now by cutting off the majority of the waste, and I've flipped one round in a collet chuck holding it by the previously turned end. We'll go ahead and center drill, support it with the tailstock and turn down this portion here to the same diameter as the other end. Then we get on to the ball turning part, which is, I'm guessing, what you all come here to see. Get on with it, Mark. Okay, I'll do the rest of these off camera and then we'll come back. Okay, it's time to get to the pointy end of this build, and this is how I'm holding these roughly prepared blanks. So I've got a threaded arbor in a collet chuck, and I can run the thread in the end of the prepared blank right up hard against that shoulder, and then we can bring in the tailstock support. Now what I had done with all of the blanks is machined this outside diameter to the finished dimension shown on the drawing. So that'll be the outside diameter of the die holder. And the next step then was to use a ball turner to produce that profile. Now this is the ball turner that I had made many years ago, and this one works pretty good. It does the majority of the work that I would need to do with a ball turner, but it does have some limitations. So I've got that roughly centered over the stock there now, and you can swing that either side of center, but there are a few problems with trying to do it on this particular job. So let me set up one of the finished blanks that I've already made, and I'll show you what the problem is. So here's one of the die holder bodies I've already made, and I'll show you what the problem is. So as you start to traverse the tool bit, which is here, and it pokes through the center of this yoke, you can get to about 45 degrees, and then this side of the tool holder clashes with this arm. So you can get about 45 degrees either side of center, but then you run out of travel. So then I thought a better option would be to use one of those ball turners that traverses over the top, and they're usually based on a boring head. So I made one, and I'll show you how it looks. Okay, this is the tool that I ended up using. Now this boring head was given to me by a friend. I don't know what brand it is. It just says Metric Australia on it. I've never seen one like it before, but it actually performs quite well. I did have to make this collar, and it's mounted in a quick change tool holder. I also made this sort of handle on the end here to pivot the tool tip. Now the boring tool that I'm using here is one that came in the box with the boring head. It's a bit dodgy looking. I think it's had a piece of high-speed steel welded onto a shank, and you do have to alter the grind of the tool tip so that it cuts directly down the center line of the boring head. The only problem with this one is that the adjustment screw is underneath, and you can't easily modify it to have the adjustment screw on the top. So as you see in a minute, you only have to set the radius of the tool tip once, and then after that you can do all the machining without changing that. So I get another blank set up in here. The first step is not to do the ball turning, but it's actually to do this radius blend on both ends. I'm just going to use this 6mm high-speed steel round tool bit to do the blend in the corners. Then we'll do the ball turning. So you get this really weird profile on both ends, but that's going to go away later. This is just about giving you clearance so that when you do the ball turning operation you don't sort of run too hard into the waste material. This is going to have to be blended again after we've done the ball turning, but we'll get set up now and do that. Okay, ball turner set up. Now a couple of things you need to be aware of here. The first one is you've got to get the tip of the tool lined up exactly over the center of the part and the arbor in X. That means moving the tool tip into the center of the arbor along the axis of the spindle. And the other one is you need to be able to position the tip of the tool exactly over the center of this particular part, and that's measuring in Z. So let's do the X dimension first. So I'm going to run the tool tip down, and then we're going to move the cross slide in and just feel for the high spot on that arbor. And it's just rubbing there now. Okay, at that point you can zero your DRO, or if you've got a micrometer collar, zero that, and then move in by the radius of that arbor. Now the diameter of that arbor is 15.96. My DRO reads in diameters, so I'll move in exactly that amount, 15.96, and that will place the center of the tool over the arbor center line. Okay, I'm going to lift the tool tip and we move 15.96. Okay, I'm going to zero Y there. So what I'll do now is I'm going to move the tip of the tool in. We'll actually use the other side of this. Right, move the tip of the tool in, and I'm going to run the tool tip over against the inside face of the bore. And again, we're just going to do that until we can feel the high spot. So you want the face of the part to be more or less vertical. And I'm just rocking the tool backwards and forwards. Okay, that's the touch point there. Okay, at that point we're going to zero Z. Now on my DRO it says X, but it's actually Z. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to roll the tool over and do the same thing again on the other side. And okay, that's it there. So at that point we're going to use the half function on the DRO. So we'll go half X, and then we're going to move back to 0. That's close enough. Okay, if I rock the tool up so now it's directly on top of the part and move that in, it should be just scuffing that part there. Now what I had done previously is I'd messed around with the boring head, and we'd moved the tool tip in and out until we could get that condition where the tool tip is just scrubbing the top of the part there. Now at that point I don't touch the radius of the ball turner or the boring head. So there are a couple of different approaches here. Once you've actually zeroed in X and Z, you could vary the radius of the boring head and just sweep backwards and forwards without moving the cross slide, or you can move in Z, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to move down in Z, and I'm just going to sweep through 90 degrees and just keep moving in Z until we get back very close to 0 in Z. And then I'll do the same thing running the other way. I'll actually move up toward the headstock and then come back slowly, moving in Z until we get back to almost 0. Then we'll do a complete sweep with Z. I'm running the lathe here at 500 RPM. I'm not going to use any cutting oil until I get very close to the finished cuts. And for those people who are saying you should be using a carbide insert, the problem here is the interrupted cut. So even with the high-speed steel and a sort of a generous nose radius, you'll see that the surface finish is not brilliant. So there's a lot of vibration, there's a lot of chatter, and when we go to do the finish cut, we'll go really, really slowly with a super light cut, and even then the surface finish is not brilliant. Okay, you can see that form starting to develop there, but I'm still 3.7 millimeters off my center in Z. And on this other side, you can see there's still a big flat there, but that will disappear as we come up to close to center in Z. So I'm going to stop at 0.2 from the center, and then I'll go to the left, and I'll do the same thing, sweeping back toward the center, toward the right, and then we'll do the final sweep cut exactly on center in Z. Okay, that takes care of both the left and the right hand side from where I'm standing, and I'm about 0.2 millimeters off either side from center. One of the things about my lathe is I don't have a lock on the cross slide, and as I'm working away I can see the cross slides moving back toward me just because of the interrupted cut. So I'm just having to monitor that on the DRO as I go and just keep correcting it. So for this final cut now, I'm going to run the speed up to 760. Put some cutting oil on there, and we'll just try and get a really fine finish on that, or as good as we can with what we've got. Okay, that's about as good as it gets with this high-speed steel tool. Unfortunately, you can't just get like emery cloth and hold it underneath while the lathe is spinning, because that would put quite a big radius on these edges here. I do want the edges to be sort of radius over, but I want it to be uniform all the way around. Well, what I'll do now is blend this corner again. Now I know where to stop. Okay, I think that one's done. I've got one more to go. Then I'll show you how the handles are made, and then the final step is to drill 3 holes around this outer surface here for the grub screws. So this is called speed finishing, cordless drill, Scotch-Brite belt. And when that's Parkerized, it'll look $1 million. All of these have been processed now. They've been drilled and tapped M7 at both ends with the extension handles. These smaller ones here just have an integrated handle, but you could slip a tube over that if you needed a bit more purchase on the die. Now I've got one set up here in the dividing head, everything's centered up and ready to go. And I've got a little like a stub arbor in the chuck of the dividing head, and I can turn that around later on to do the smaller ones. So we're going to drill 3 holes, tapped M5, 45 degrees apart. You'll notice it's not centered, it's offset toward the larger bore, so that the grub screws will enter the die exactly on center line. So anybody else cop a razzing just recently from Joe Pye? And the absolute ban on T-type tap wrenches. So if you're watching Joe, take a note. Must admit that does work way better. Okay, I'll do all the rest of these off camera. It's just a lot of repetition. Yeah, lots of drilling, lots of tapping. Well, here we are, all finished, or at least for this video anyway. Now, this was the one that I was trying to replicate. This one is a solid forged steel one-piece die holder, and this is the copy. This is the version that I made, and this one here, of course, is 3 pieces, so 2 separate handles and the center section that was machined with the ball turner. Now, this was the Mark I version that was machined with the profile turning attachment. And if you put them side by side, it'd be pretty hard to tell, except for this one being Parkerized. Now I will eventually Parkerize all of these so that they'll last in my workshop without going rusty. And here are the little 13/16 die holders here. And once again, this was the original that was made with the profile turning attachment, and these are the 2 copies done with the ball turner. Now one of the goals here was to be able to use a common hex key for all of these tools. So all of these take M5 socket head grub screws. Doesn't matter which one you pick up, they're all the same. And for the center screw, what I've done is I machined a 60-degree conical point on that grub screw. So there it is there. And what that allows you to do is to open up the split in the die. So you drive that into that split and you can expand the die, or if you loosen it and tighten up the 2 outer grub screws, you can contract the die slightly. Now these were machined on the lathe with a collet chuck using a very small carbide boring bar, and I think you can buy socket head grub screws with that conical point. I didn't have any. And I've used the same diameter screws for this one here. This is a tailstock die holder for the metal lathe. It has the same fasteners both ends. This is for 1-inch diameter dies, that's for 1.5 inches, and you could just simply flip it around, use both ends. And this was one I made for 13/16 diameter dies. Unfortunately, I didn't have the foresight to use M5 socket head grub screws in this one here. This was made quite a few years ago now, and I use 3/16 BSW screws, which is a really bad choice. What I could do is machine new holes around this side here and use the M5 screws on that side, and I think that handle can be swapped over to the other side. So that's probably what I'll do. Now you're probably looking at all of that and say, gee Mark, that's a lot of work, and you can buy these things off the shelf. And yes, you're absolutely correct. In fact, here is my Hare and Forbes catalogue, which came in the mail the other day, and there it is there. That's a 1-inch diameter die holder, $12 or $13.20 including GST. And you'd say, well, they're cheap, why don't you buy them? Well, that's the problem, they are cheap. The center section of those die holders is made of a die cast alloy. We used to buy them when I was teaching in the workshop at school, and the kids would drop them on the floor and they just snap through, usually through one of the grub screw holes. So yeah, they're not brilliant quality. So that's why I made my own. Plus, it was interesting. I enjoyed the build. A lot of repetition though. Now, what about these ones though? Alright, these are 3D printed in 316L stainless steel. I got these printed a while ago just for fun. I just wanted to see how they turn out. And if you've been watching my steam engine build, it was the same company that I had the eccentric made with, and I just uploaded these STL files. These have already got the holes drilled in them, or at least printed in them, and all they need is threading on the end, thread through those holes and machine the bores out. And the plan is that I want to be able to give some of these away. Now I'm coming up to 40,000 subscribers, and I thought it'd be nice to reward some of the viewers, because without your patronage, without you watching those videos, I don't get the income, and that income is in turn donated to Wilvos, which is a wildlife volunteer organisation. Just last month I was able to donate $800 to Wilvos, and I think that because you watch the videos, that generates the income, that helps out the carers. With that money that I donate, they actually buy fuel cards so that they can give the fuel cards to the carers, and if they have to go and pick up an animal or release an animal, they're not paying for the petrol out of their own pocket. So that's typically where the money goes, but also goes on feed and supplements for the animals that they rescue. So I just wanted to thank you. So what I'll do is probably in a few videos time, I'll do the follow-up on these, and I'll show you how I've machined these stainless steel ones. And what I'll do is I'll give away a set. So I'll give away a steel one in both sizes, and probably a stainless steel one, and there'll be 2 prizes. So watch out for that. Like I say, it'll be coming up in a month or 2, and by that time we'll have gone through the 40,000 subscribers. So thank you very much, and like I say, it helps out the wildlife. Now, speaking of wildlife, I got the camera out last week in a break in the rain, so I thought you'd like to see that. So let's check it out, and thanks for watching today, and on the next video we're back on the Stewart steam engine. Okay, it's Presso, signing out now. Cheers. I'm not sure what the collective noun for a group of kookaburras would be. Maybe a chortle or a cackle of kookaburras. This is a floating wetland we built for our dam, and it's made of 90mm stormwater pipe. It's got a geotextile fabric stretched over it, and we've planted some water plants through the geotextile, and this provides habitat for, in this case, 2 black ducks. So we're super happy they decided to call it home. And one of the questions I get often asked is, do we try to attract the wildlife to our garden by feeding them, whether we try to tame the wildlife? But these are all wild animals, and the only thing you have to do is provide them with shelter and security. So with this floating wetland, they can get out of the way of predators, and they get some privacy. And we've anchored the floating wetland on both sides of the dam so it'll stay put in the middle.